When I think about the question of who won the war, I think it's more important to ask, or it's a prerequisite to ask a question: what is the war? I think that if we know what the war is and what the war is all about, we can easily at least begin to contend with the answer of who has won the war. And as you said in your introduction, indeed, this is a war of regime change. The US and Israel have this historical habit of always assigning the wrong reasons of their wars that are aimed at other things aside from what is being declared publicly. For example, the first war against Iraq was supposedly to liberate Kuwait. It wasn't exactly that. It was largely about ensuring that the post Soviet Union world is a world that is controlled entirely by the United States and its allies, and they needed to fix their, kind of flex their muscles from Panama to Iraq to elsewhere. To the point that at one point we know that Saddam Hussein was negotiating some exit out of the war, and the Americans absolutely not, even though he was willing to concede in whatever the Americans were asking him to do. The same thing happened with the Taliban, by the way. They were willing to give Osama bin Laden to Pakistan and say, you know what, here's a middle ground, try him in Pakistan. What's the big deal? They wouldn't, because ultimately it was never really about the thing that they say it's all about. And the same thing, of course, happened with Iran. Iran negotiated in good faith, and they indeed achieved the 2015 nuclear agreement, and they were holding their side of that agreement until the Americans pulled out of the agreement. But why did you pull out, even though you are saying that your problem with Iran is entirely related to Iran's nuclear capabilities, when they have already conceded to all of your demands in exchange for, easing the sanctions, opening the commercial routes, allowing them to export their oil, and so forth and so on, unless it is about something entirely different. Um, so let's talk about what is this thing that is entirely different. And in order for us to address this question, let's talk about the transition. I believe the Middle East has been in a state of transition for such a long time. Again, in fact, I remember mentioning this in my last intervention, in your webinar, where I spoke about Gramsci's reference to the, kind of how history emerges out of two conflicting forces, where the old refuses to die and the young is yet to be born. And he speaks of that as the age of monsters, and we live in this age of monsters. This transition, this age of monsters, culminating in the genocide and the utter extermination of the Palestinian people and the utter violation of international law and the complete and utter disrespect of any values that connects us together as human beings, is the ultimate age of monsters. I don't think we have experienced anything similar to this since World War II, but I would even contend and say even slightly more, because at least in World War II, you had two competing powerful forces, each trying to impose its will on the other. While in Gaza, it's alone. It's alone. Who are the great armies and allies that are standing up for the Palestinians? The very Arabs, who are supposed to be the closest of kin to the Palestinians, are actually part of the conspiracy to defeat the Palestinians. So I would even say that at some level, this is even worse than the global conflict and the atrocities that occurred in World War II, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the geopolitics around. This transition has been going on for a long time. And I just want to mention something interesting that I recalled. When I went to Gaza 2012, I'm walking in the streets of Gaza City, and I see these large billboards written in Arabic, English, and Persian, in which the resistance in Gaza, without naming the resistance, is thanking the Iranian people and the Iranian government for their support of the resistance, but with no signature. It was not signed by Hamas or Islamic Jihad or anybody. And I asked, why aren't these things signed? Why aren't these? who is being thanked specifically and who is doing the thank you. And I was told that there was a large debate going on within the movement where Hamas and the Islamic Jihad wanted to openly thank Iran. But on the other hand, they were under a lot of pressure from Arab Gulf countries that saying by thanking Iran, you are declaring that you are part of the Iran camp, and that is too dangerous for your geopolitical interests as far as the Arabs are concerned. So the result was let's thank Iran, but let's not say or declare who has done the thanking. And I thought that was kind of a reflection of the great conflict or the power play in the Middle East, where you know that there are camps that are being formulated, and we know who is on this side and we know who's on the other side. But for smaller political non state actors like Hamas and others, it is difficult, or it was then difficult, for them to transition fully and to say we are with this side against that side. I think October 7 made it very clear where all these sides now stand. I think the fear that Hamas was worried that is going to be lumped with the Iranian camp versus the Islamic Jihad, I think those days are behind us, and we know where these camps now are very clearly standing. So the transitioning of the Middle East is continuing. Another example of transitioning was in 1996. Benjamin Netanyahu is about to become the prime minister of Israel for the first time in his career between 1996 and 1999. He asked his very close friend of the neoconservative movement in Washington, Richard Pearl, to compose some sort of a document that would allow him to regain control of the Middle East. And that's really interesting. Like, why was Israel so intently focused as early as the mid 90s on the idea of trying to control the Middle East? Israel was already worried that things are going in the opposite direction of what Israel wanted at the time. Richard Falk comes, or Richard Falk, Richard Pearl comes with this document, a clean break, he calls it, a new strategy for securing the realm. Let's move past the Oslo Accords and the peace process and all this nonsense. Let's just be focused and let's be clear and let's be honest about what we want in the Middle East. And what did they want from the Middle East? They wanted, with the help of Turkey and Jordan, according to Richard Pearl, to contain, destabilize, and even roll back Syria. They wanted to remove Saddam Hussein from power, and they wanted to, in order for them to destabilize Syria, they would do so in order for them to weaken Iran. And they saw Syria and Iran as the principal agents, and that's their words, not mine, the principal agents of aggression in Lebanon. So in order for Israel to gain control of all of this realm, they needed to take the initiative, or what they call the strategic initiative, by engaging directly with them and preventing the US of having total control over Israel's relationship with the entire region. And I would say that was most likely the very beginning of Netanyahu's plan to dominate the Middle East independent from US foreign policy. So I don't think we can just assume that US-Israeli relations remained unchanged over the course of the years since 1948 until today. Yes, the US is an imperialist country, and yes, Israel has been a major agent of American imperialism and Western imperialism in the Middle East, but the relationship began shifting at one point. And I think this is really the crux of the conflict, if you will, between US and Israeli foreign policies during the times of Barack Obama and in later years, is that Netanyahu is trying to take full control over Western imperialism in the Middle East, to navigate it and to push it in a direction that is only beneficial to Israel, even if it comes at the expense of his Western allies. And we saw that kind of culminating all the way to his famous speech in the US Congress where he challenges Obama openly. Not that Obama was a non-imperialist president, to the contrary, but he just felt that Obama was not moving in that direction that was set forth by Richard Perle in 1996. So Netanyahu has always, years and years before the Al-Aqsa flood or the war in Gaza, has always had this major mega plan in mind. And he always understood that Iran is ultimately the greatest enemy of Israel, especially after that idea was further accentuated after the defeat of Iraq or the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and ultimately what happened in Syria. So Iran becomes this final goal, this final objective that would make everything better for Netanyahu. The thing that would allow Netanyahu to come and say, listen, maybe I was your leader during October 7, but not only did I rectify that mistake, I destroyed Gaza. I am pushing the Palestinians out of Gaza altogether. Not only that, I rearranged the Middle East. Therefore, his obsession with the term the new Middle East, making the Middle East, remaking the Middle East, because Netanyahu has always thought kind of this long-term idea of making Israel the dominant superpower in the Middle East and eventually beyond the Middle East. But then you have this problem, and the problem called Iran. Now, the thing is, Iran, and I'm just going to check my time element here. The thing about Iran is that Iran has been on a kind of a rising trajectory since the overthrow of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, in 1979. Iran started, there's some documents that suggest that when the Iranian Revolution happened, that the military technology of Iran under the Shah was too advanced that the new Iranian society that took over did not even know how to operate such military arsenal, compared to where it is now, where Iran is manufacturing its own weapons and is actually exporting weapons to its allies. Without Iran, Ansarullah would have not sustained themselves. Without Iran, Hezbollah, and of course the Palestinian resistance would have not been able to put up such a prolonged and sustainable fight against Israel, and even beyond that. So now, from an Israeli point of view, the Iranian menace is real, and it has to be overthrown somehow. Of course, the nuclear element is the brand. I mean, you need to sell that idea to the rest of the world. You need a brand. You can't say, well, you know what, we're insecure about our status in the Middle East, and therefore we want to knock the Iranians out because there's a power play underway in the region. That is not something you can sell via Fox News and CNN and American Western propaganda platforms. You need something that's far more compelling, which is the bomb. The bomb, the bomb, the bomb, the bomb, despite the fact that the Iranians themselves says, we're not interested in the bomb. It goes against our spiritual beliefs, against our faith. We have a fatwa, a religious decree against the bomb. But that viewpoint is almost never transmitted to an American audience. All that they hear is Netanyahu screaming about the Iranian bomb over and over again, yet he could not get that final wish he wanted, because Iran is several times the size of Iraq. I went to Iraq just before the war, in 2003. And that Iraq was a devastated society. The sanctions have destroyed their hospitals. Every Thursday, they had this mass funeral of all the children who were killed during the American sanctions on the country. About 5,000 children a month were killed in Iraq. It was a genocide. The country could barely function. It had no allies. The Arabs had betrayed it. Compare this to Iran right now. It's a powerful regional power. It has strong connections internationally. It has regional allies. It is able to not only to survive under American sanctions, but in some areas and some fields even thrive. And that is the enigma. That is the problem that Netanyahu is struggling with. So this man who is unable to defeat a resistance that is fighting under tunnels during a famine and a genocide in Gaza, he decides he wants to go to war against Iran. And the outcome, I mean, Israel did everything it could do in the 12-day war. but everything that it could do with American and Western help. This is, I mean, the thing about intelligence, the thing about these kind of covert operations, you really don't know where's the intelligence coming from. Is this Israeli ingenuity and know-how, or is this American and British and French and German and so forth and so on, which is of course the latter. Everything that Israel supposedly achieved in Iran in this war could have never been possible without total and unconditional US and other Western support. But everything that Iran has done in retaliation was almost 100% Iranian technology, Iranian diplomacy, Iranian know how, Iranian society's ability to remain cohesive and strong and to actually emerge even more united. So I wouldn't say that this war, the outcome of the war was inconclusive. I would say, considering what Netanyahu was hoping to achieve in that war and what he has been hoping to achieve as a culmination of many years of anti Iranian propaganda and buildup, technologically and in terms of intelligence and militarily, I would say that Israel has received a decisive, well, maybe not a decisive, but a major blow. It could be a decisive blow if this kind of suicide nationalism that continues to control Israeli society drives Netanyahu to another fit of madness, to go to another major war against Iran. But definitely, I think Iran emerged much stronger and much more capable after this war. And if we must decide on the answer whether Iran or Israel have won, I would say Iran has definitely won this war.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.